So this is a session on technologies for managing your home and making it and you safer. And our speakers are Shahram Payandeh, who is Professor of Engineering Science at SFU, William Kearns, who is Professor in the Department of Rehabilitation and Mental Health Counselling at the University of South Florida, Ian Mitchell of the Department of Computer Science at UBC, and Emily O'Hearn in the Department of Biomedical Physiology and Kinesiology at SFU.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I talk about this kind of a somewhat vague topic, maybe I would like to share with you some of my previous experiences. When I was a younger lad, maybe a while ago, and just freshly graduated from university, having this training in robotics, I had this vision that we can automate and replace things with automated devices. So having that vision coming to Vancouver, trying to find out where I can find this place where I can utilize my vision. So at that time, luckily, there were a trend in surgery, which called minimally invasive surgery, where surgeons sort of performed the operation through keyhole procedures. And I approached some of the surgeons, and I noticed the common difficulty they have is that because they perform the operation through an endoscope, and because they're using long pliers-looking tools, and because the vision, the image they see from the surgical side is sort of tilted, and it's not the natural visual scene they're used to, they have quite a difficulty performing simple tasks such as suturing, cutting, and so on and so forth. So as a younger person, I said, I'm going to solve the problem for you. I put this fancy robotic device that can do everything and manipulate objects. Then I find out, there's a couple of issues beside the technological challenges. The surgeons don't feel comfortable being replaced by automated devices, number one. Number two, as a healthcare system, there are levels of liability involved. So the question becomes, if you automate the task and something goes wrong, whose fault is it? So anyway, so that was a turn off for me. But nevertheless, I start talking to them, and I try to put them, the surgeon, at the center of my design angle. So I start consulting with them, trying to come up with an angle where I can still utilize this notion of automation in the context of helping them to do the operation. So I start interviewing them, watching their operation, and finally, I put the surgeon in the center of the design, and I design my apparatus around them. So right now, most typical surgery, they're not done by robots. They're more or less teleoperated. So in other words, the surgeon is still in charge. Our system helps them to perform the operation. So as I age and I start looking around, so this idea which I present here, I'm sure has been around. Everybody knows about this. And this is a question about how do we automate our healthy seniors environment. And again, keeping the context around the senior themselves and their family. So just to recap, so I'm going to talk about what is being called now as ambient sensors. And also there's a notion of what we call the cloud robotics. So hopefully through this very short overview of a presentation, I can communicate to you some of the angles I'm looking at. All right, so visual monitoring. Cameras are around on your phone, on your laptop, and watching people doing things for security and surveillance is one of the main aspects of using cameras. For the seniors, the family member can log in and watch, talk to you, connect to you, and maybe eventually through some sensing and processing, be able to automatically detect what person does in their living quarter, what kind of activity they're involved. And maybe it is possible that we can summarize these activities and log them over time to see what exactly the seniors are involved, and if they have what level of activity they will involve, and if it's deteriorating over time. Now, one of the problems with actually visually monitoring is the privacy. You know, I don't want to have a camera in my bedroom or anywhere else in my house, people watching me. So that's one of the biggest challenges of having network of camera. Now, the other thing is, if assuming that we have these cameras, the question is, what do we display them? If there's a caregiver watching this cluster of senior housing in independent living, what kind of information you want to display? So that's always becomes an issue. And the other thing is, what information does the patient or the senior or the family feel comfortable to share as far as their visual movement goes? So there are solutions out there, on-off switches and maybe sometimes wearable sensors, but they always have their own challenges, people forgetting to put them on, or they're not as effective maybe to capturing certain movement or gait pattern of the patient if you're monitoring their sort of a physical mobility. So there's a question of what's the solution. Well, actually, there is no solution yet, but there is this potential approach, and this is due to consumer-based product that's coming on the market, which sort of combines a number of sensing modalities. And maybe through some fancy computation and processing, it is possible to monitor the activity while protecting people's privacy, and also supply enough information that the caregiver can analyze and maybe predict some sort of a abnormal behavior. So this consumer-based product. So the other thing is we also find out, especially in European community, or here as well, being connected is very important for seniors. So these are some of the quotes I borrowed from some of the literature as well. And there's a notion of cloud robotics around, and the idea is that you can make, say, a mobile platform from a very low-cost material, but you connect them through the internet, and all the intelligence as far as processing information is done remotely and then processed back to the robot in somebody's housing. So this is ideas that I'm going to talk about. The other thing that's really a motivational statement is that seniors like to be connected to the family. My mother always called me on Skype, and sometimes I show them what I'm doing. So they feel comfortable and they're connected. And there are other motivational statements, seniors who are socially involved or less isolated. But again, I don't have any claim for these statements, but I just borrowed them from the literature. Now, the ambient sensing. So as I said, beside the camera, there are other types of sensing modalities. But again, before we actually deploy any sensors, we have to ask these questions that what would the seniors and their family feel comfortable to share? I mean, as an engineer or being in academia, I have all these, ideas, but I'd like to see it actually being implemented. But to implement it, I have to talk to the receiving end, myself eventually being one of them, that what I feel comfortable to share with the world as far as my movement and activities goes. The caregiving personnel, if somebody is monitoring, what are the informations that they would like to see as far as the emotion and activity of the senior goes? And then again, we have to show to the seniors what these sensors actually measure. We have to be more clear with them so they don't feel so threatened with these sensing modalities. So this is one of the very important questions we have to ask. And then again, visualizing. So in the future, say we have a cluster of seniors living in their own independent housing. And say we have this sensing technology that monitors the movement and activity. But we want to transmit this information to a monitoring station. So the question is, how do you display this information? What do they want to see? So these are some of the future questions, I guess, that we need to pose and eventually address. So this is a picture from the web I borrowed. The top one is just the current method is essentially you have a bunch of on and off switches and maybe a proximity sensors that crudely tell maybe what's happening in the living quarter. But these sensors, again, they don't give you the sort of over the long term how this patient moves around, what are the gait patterns, how many times they pause at certain place. So that's the limitation of the current technology. Now, this picture, again, is not monitoring the senior housing, but it's more of a security and surveillance. Again, we have a bunch of cameras. So one idea is we have cameras in the places and people watch them, and if something happens, they trigger some events. But that's, again, it becomes too much if you have too many of these clusters of seniors around. So the sensing, which I'm talking about, this sensing modality, these are the new technology that's being introduced very in an accelerated fashion. So the most popular one is the Kinect, which is, has the normal camera, and also it can measure the depth, and it can also sense the infrared transmission. And also it has a directional microphone. So say you put the camera there, and if somebody falls at some corner, the sensor knows that there's an event happening at that corner. So you can see if you combine all these modalities, there might be a chance that this kind of sensors can give us all those information that we want as far as monitoring the motion and movement goes. Now, then this one to the left or to the right is, again, another company from Intel. So these sensors are just coming at the consumer-based level, coming out, and so there's a good opportunity to figure out what to do with them. And the cost is very, these are $200 or $150, so it's not that expensive. So it gives you some motivation to study them further. Now, as far as the information goes, so those images that you see to the left and to the right, these are some of the previous work we've done as far as monitoring the movements. And also, in case of a fall, for example, we can use multiple cameras to detect where the persons fall and zoomed on to it. And you can track people even in a cluttered environment. So these are possible. But the only problem with this, what we call the RGB camera, which is a standard camera, is the processing power and also the efficiency of these sensors are very unpredictable. They're highly dependent on the way the room is lit and the colors people wearing. So by themselves, they're not as efficient. However, when you combine it with other types of sensing modality, which these sensors have, they may be possible to enhance the response. So here's an example of a directional audio. So this arrow at the bottom half curve show you where exactly a noise or somebody fell down happened. And then the one to the bottom is the depth sensor. This sensor measures the depth in the scene. So it can tell you, for example, how people are located in the room. And the one to the right is also had the infrared capability, which can pick up the infrared transmission from the object. So these sensors, what we call the ambient sensor, they have a potential to essentially give us this combined sensing modality, which we can use to maybe monitor things, so in our case being the seniors. So these are some of the reconstructions of the data. As you can see, one application we used is that for the sleep disorder at night, so you can monitor the person, how their sleep patterns are, predict how many times they move. And then the bottom one is how you combine multiple reading of these data. I'm just going to move up fast here. This is another notion of reconstructing these data. So you can reconstruct from these point clouds various shapes and sizes. You can reconstruct the person without even disclosing the identity. So they have lots of potentials, and this is a typical one that Microsoft shows, that people can play games, exercises, and it can detect motions. And we also experimented with this, that we can control robots just by making gestures. So if you have automated devices or things in the room, you can turn them on and off just by using your hand. So these are potentials of these sensors. Now, visualizing this information is a different story. Okay, so assuming we get all this data about how people move and how they walk and what activity they do, how do we display it? Well, that's another problem. So these are just typical examples of, for example, if you can code the information that you get as far as activity goes, it is possible to say how, if a person is active or not active. You can even plot them in some sort of a graphical interface where you can see over the course of the week, certain activity was done more often than the other. And you can go on and on and on. So essentially the problem becomes the visualization of information becomes another key challenge for this sensing. So this is a very hypothetical example. If you have a cluster of these seniors and you're monitoring, you can represent those clusters as a patch on a sphere where each dot moves on that patch. And if you zoom into it, you can see the exact activity of a senior popping up on the screen. So there are many ways that you can essentially. So I'm going to move on fast with this because I'm sure everybody knows about this cloud robotics stuff. So this idea is quite popular in Europe. And essentially the idea is that besides having a video transmission, like we all know through Skype, so one idea is that, say I'm a senior citizen and I lost my key. I don't know where I put my key in my room. And I'm quite frustrated because of the other things happening. So my son calls me through this network, and he starts moving around this robot, which has a little camera. And he keeps going remotely controlling this robot in the room, and he finally tells me, look, Dad, your keys is over there. Go get it over there. And that's wonderful. That's fantastic. So this is the idea of what we're talking about here. Basically, it's a moving platform with a monitor, and then you can connect. So the senior feels connected, and also if you need help, they can move this device around remotely and find things for you. So I'm sure you have seen the Sheldon so this is more or less ideas. So, it gives you a sense of telepresence, which is very important. You can have platform with the arm, with the camera, so you can control the platform and the camera looks around. You can have a wheelchair which is remotely controlled, and it has a camera in the back, so in case you can sit in the wheelchair and I can walk you around in your room to look for things or navigate around. So we have this demo of this basics of this design outside, and if you have a time, you can stop by to look at. So essentially, you can build this also under $750. So, I mean, the cost can be reduced, but it's possible that we can make it very practical. And so essentially, the main point is the connecting to this robot through the network. So we have done an experiment that we create a game, and a number of people connect through the network, and they will manage to move around this robot remotely. And so this setup worked, so we're quite happy with this. There's some technical details about this, which I'm going to skip. So this is the interface, a typical interface. So this image is a video coming from the robot, and you got these buttons that you can move around. So essentially, the robot can move in that space. In conclusion, I'm going to, the main benefits, I think, of this cloud robotics, essentially the first one, which I stated. So it's allowed the family members to be connected to the senior, And it allowed the family member or caregiver to help them around or to even talk with them. So instead of, say, the senior going to the desk and to log into your website to talk to you, you can go to them by controlling this robot. And you can help them with other things, such as, did you turn the lights off? You can always go check the room and so on and so forth. Anyway, with this, I'm going to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here this afternoon. Again, I'm Bill Kearns. I'm from the University of South Florida in Tampa. And I just wanted to talk to you about two projects which we have underway down at the University of South Florida in association with the James A. Haley Veterans Administration Hospital. One of the projects that we have underway is a polytrauma transitional rehabilitation program, Smart Home, which has a tracking system installed in it, which is based on ultra-wideband. We're not going to go into a lot of detail about it, but imagine a global positioning system that actually works inside of a building and can provide you with, say, positional accuracy on everybody in this room right now with an accuracy of about 6 inches. This gives you some idea of the type of capability that we're talking about. The Smart Home system, which is derived from the tracking information used, was born in this clinical polytrauma facility. It provides support for activities of daily living. We have about 40 panels throughout the facility, which are kind of like iPads on the walls that deliver prompts. These are essentially prompts for ADLs, such as take your medication. It's time to go to, say, room 105 for your therapy appointment, etc. And these are delivered, the information is delivered contingent on where the individual is standing. So if you have to be standing at or near one of the panels for it to deliver a prompt to you. And it has to be contingent not only on your identity, but time of day and your schedule, as well as a number of other factors. Anyway, we have also taken data from the tag that the individual wears, and I'll just hold up one of these. They're, the ultra-wideband tags are only about 1 inch on a side and about 1/2 inch in thickness. They weigh about 40 grams, to give you some idea. There's a small wrist strap that feeds through it. It's used on the wrist as this, or it can be placed in the back of a person's identity badge, because all the patients wear one of these, and they also have an RFID tag, which is used to unlock the door in the facility so that they can enter and exit into their bedroom. So to give you some idea that it's kind of part of an overall system. We also have within this system linked sensor data coming from medication boxes, water sensors, etc. So this tracking system can give us information about whether or not a person actually complied with what they were told to do. So if we tell you you need to go to room 105 for your appointment, we can actually see if you went there, because we can follow the tag. And we know exactly whether you went there and how long it took you to get there, and we can develop measures of compliance, which can then be referred back to other variables, which we're going to go into. So there's a lot of different things that we can get from these different sources of sensor data and positioning data, but there's also a bit more. There's really some buried treasure encapsulated in those data. Now, the real-time location systems, the RTLS here, is more than just providing the identity of individuals or information about how fast they walk or the direction that they take, because we can get that information from that tag. Because again, it is like an aircraft transponder. If you want to think of it like the individual transponders on airplanes when they come into the Vancouver airport. It helps the air traffic controller keep track of exactly who is who. So we get that and timing information. But for over 50 years, police have known that short-term cognitive impairment is revealed in walking patterns or the patterns of movement of individuals in field sobriety tests. So to give you some idea of what we're talking about here, we have this handy little clip, and hopefully with the audio will be loud.
In Ohio, a state trooper is trying to stop a suspected female DUI in this SUV. Motorist suspected of driving under the influence, DUI. are routinely asked by police officers to perform one or more field sobriety exercises. The woman aroused suspicion when her car was seen veering all over the highway. It seems like this woman has no idea that the patrol officer has been following her for quite some time.
How much you had to drink? Not at all. Not at all? All right. Yes, your insurance card with you?
Yes, I do.
With the woman's vehicle finally stationary, the officer wants to begin with the sobriety test. But before he can, the woman decides that she needs to retie her shoelaces.
Whoa, 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 don't fall over on me.
The officer finally starts his test, beginning with something easy. He asks her to walk in a straight
Just
line.
like that. Keep your arms down at your side. What I want you to do is take 9 heel-to-toe steps, just like this. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 9. Stand back. When you're ready to begin, go ahead and begin.
The officer has seen enough, and as soon as he began, he stops the
Go ahead and
test.
turn around for me. Hands on your back. Relax, relax, relax.
The woman is arrested for operating a vehicle under the influence of alcohol.
Under arrest for OVI.
Okay, so what you just saw there was a case of an individual weaving all over the highway, but also, as you can see, walking and weaving all over the street, even as they're walking. So one of the things that we're trying to do here, let me just return to our presentation, is we are actually doing this same kind of test, if you think about it, each time that a person moves about within our smart home. Again, we have a transponder on each of the individuals, and we can get highly accurate data as often as 10 times per second if we want. We typically do an update rate on this at about once per second. But instead of using a cop, we're using the real-time location system, the tracking information on the transponder. And we have also borrowed a mathematical technique called fractal dimension as a way of studying the straightness of the walk that an individual makes. Now, fractal dimension is basically a study of lines or the straightness of them and uncorrelated turns. But it turns out that you can use this directly on the tracking data coming from the tag. Now, fractal D, as we call it, ranges from 1.0, which is a perfectly straight line, which almost never is seen in nature, to a value of 2.0, which is a drunkard's walk. It's actually what it's called. And what we find when we begin to look at the data that gets generated from this is some very interesting things. One of the things that I should mention is that fractal D was created, or I should say has been used extensively by animal ecologists. In fact, one of our associates is Dr. Villas Nams at Dalhousie University, who has been using fractal dimension for many years to study oriented behavior of animals in the wild. So effectively what we've done has been to go from a GPS type environment like he's using down to a micro scale GPS within a building. So these are two examples of two women occupying the same physical area over a period of 1 hour, beginning at 9 a.m. on a specific day. You notice any difference between these two? Okay, the red circles here denote the sensor placements. We only used 4 sensors in this particular study. It's one of our earliest ones. The lady in the top had a fractal dimension value that was calculated at 1.2, which is a fairly straight path. She had an MMSE of 25, which is in a normal range. The individual in the lower panel, as you can see, a lot more walking and a lot more variable walking. She's really all over the place. Had a fractal D of about 1.4 and an MMSE of 21. So one of the questions we had was, now that we've seen this phenomena in assisted living facility residents, what could we possibly see if we turned our new instrument toward people with traumatic brain injury? And the Polytrauma Transitional Rehabilitation Program, Smart Home, provided us with an avenue to collect a lot of data on a lot of people over a very long time. So in this case, we followed 22 veterans over a period of greater than 4 months. And we found that over the 4 months, 10 of these individuals had a drop in fractal D over that period, and 12 did not. We found that the 10 that declined had a significantly better clinical outcome on the Mayo-Portland Adaptability Index than the individuals who did not change. The Mayo-Portland Adaptability Index is the primary clinical measure that is used in the Polytrauma Center. We published these results this month, as a matter of fact, in the Journal of Head Trauma Rehabilitation. This is an example of one of the veterans with polytrauma in the Polytrauma Center who had TBI, who declined over a period of 4 months. The line through the center is the mean, which in his case was about 1.42. But not everybody drops. As you can see, in this case, there's another person who didn't change at all over that period of 4 months. So he'd be one of the individuals who we would expect to have done more poorly on the clinical measure. Now, the implications of this are very interesting in the sense that there really are no really good, reliable biomarkers for recovery from traumatic brain injury. Because it's such a diffuse and variable type of injury, there are many different cognitive functions that can be implicated if an individual gets struck in a particular area of the head. But one of the things about fractal D is that it's relatively easy to get. If you have a tracking system that can give you reasonably good accuracy, such as the ultra-wideband system we're using, it kind of comes along with the deal. We also found in a later study that fractal D that we took from just using GPS logging devices, these are devices that are actually just about this big, actually a little bit larger, was recorded at the time of admission of another group of veterans into the Polytrauma Center. And we were interested in the predictive validity of this measure in terms of what it said about people's ability to benefit from the very prompts that they were being given. Now, you know, it's kind of taken as an article of faith that if you give somebody a prompt, that it's going to necessarily help them or somehow help an individual with cognitive impairment. At least that's the general philosophy at the VA, because when people get released from the Polytrauma Center with TBI and sent home, they're typically given apps and a smartphone and these types of things, and with the hope that it'll help them remember to take their medication and so forth. So we were very interested in seeing whether or not fractal dimension, as it was recorded from these GPS loggers, might tell us something about how well people might do over the course of the recovery while they're in the Polytrauma Center. And the findings from that, we also published this month in a second paper in the Journal of Head Trauma Rehabilitation. So we've been kind of busy this month. It's been a good one for us. This is a graph of the data from these 10 subjects. And it's very interesting and I think fairly clear-cut that individuals who have a fairly high fractal dimension values at the time that they're admitted into the Polytrauma Center don't do very well with prompts. In fact, the likelihood that they're going to do what the prompting device tells them to do drops substantially with the higher the value. So this is, again, more ammunition, if you will, toward fractal D being reflective of changes in cognition. So we understand that people can come in with severe polytrauma and that they can get better over a period of time as the TBI resolves, hopefully, but that if it doesn't resolve, there are some significant implications for how well they're going to be able to do at home with devices that provide prompts on apps or other wireless devices. So again, our indications from our research is not everybody's going to necessarily benefit from these types of prompting devices. Maybe fractal D might be one way that we could help figure out who's likely to benefit from it. And maybe it may also serve as a way for us to guide our engineering of new technologies. I mean, if you can categorize people as having a particular fractal D value, you can redesign your interface so that it works better for those people. In other words, don't go with a one-size-fits-all. So I want to close with some of the individual applications, the ADL prompts and the like, that we're currently using within the smart home system, and we have migrated to 4 homes in the community. Before I do, I just wanted to call attention to our collaborators in the project. Stephen Scott, who is the Chief of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitative Services at the James A. Haley Veterans Administration Hospital, is the PI on the project, as is Jan Jazowitz, is the director of the Smart Home Project, and Sam Phillips, who will soon be taking over his role. Again, some of the strategies that we're trying to do is to promote safety, to provide prompting as a cognitive prosthetic for individuals by providing verbal prompts and ADL instructions, and also provide reports and analytics for the clinical staff in the facility. This gives you an idea of the monitoring and analysis central core and the sources of data which typically feed into this, whether it's calendaring and prompts for appointments, et cetera, the provision of sensor data into the system, and the types of outputs that can be derived, whether they're from a web page report, which a clinician can review, an app on a dedicated tablet, or some electronic mail or text that can be sent to a clinician who needs to attend to one of the patients. These are, again, some of the different features, such as overall activity level, social interactions, in this case because the clinician and the person who has the TBI have both worn tags. We can tell actually the physical distance between 2 people. How much time do you spend within 3 feet of somebody? So if you're interested in doing follow-ups and seeing what the level of social interaction is, that's one way of getting at it. Medication compliance, because we're dealing with med boxes that will tell us when the box has been opened and the medications have been taken. In my study of the compliance, we also looked at whether or not the patients went to the nurse's window to be observed taking the medication, so we knew physically that they actually went there. Whether or not the individual has showered recently. We have water sensors, for example, which are picked up by the system and reported in. Residents' entry and exit, how much time do they spend going out in the community, and so forth. Physical exercise, whether or not they've been out and physically working out. And overall movement. There are a couple of others, like appointments attended, which are quite important, values of fractal D, et cetera, but I'm not going to go into those. We, of course, are capable of generating a full weekly report for each of the patients in the facility, which we do on a regular basis for the clinicians. And this is just an example of what one of the screen client interfaces looks like. So we have been gathering data at this time on 4 patients' homes in the area. This is largely in development. So we don't really have a lot of data aside from the fact that we have some basic satisfaction data, which indicates that the veterans are quite pleased with it. It's been generally high, but again, it's not conclusive. So just in conclusion for the study, the tracking technologies provide us now with an unprecedented opportunity to gather a lot of information on the rehabilitation process and improve home-based care. These generally tend to be low-hanging fruit. You know, you can develop algorithms and mathematical techniques to extract very interesting pieces of data like fractal D, which may be a reasonable biometric for helping track recovery from polytrauma. We're also interested in gathering all the collaborators we can on this. This is a big project. We generate multiple gigabytes of data in short periods of time. So these are good problems to have. This is my contact information, and I thank you very much for listening.
My name is Ian Mitchell. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk at this conference. I'm from the Department of Computer Science at the University of British Columbia. And I'll be talking today about a project at UBC called the People and Planet Friendly Home. I'm filling in here for Panos, who is the lead on this particular project, director of ISIS and professor of digital multimedia at UBC. He wasn't able to make it back from Europe in time to give the talk today. But I wanted to say that in addition to the usual things that, or the things that the other speakers are talking about in terms of smart homes, PPFH has a real focus on this idea of sustainability. So the idea is that we don't just want to build a smart home, we want to build a sustainable smart home. And from a sustainability point of view, we do understand that there will have to be some behavioral modification. We just don't want to make an abrupt behavioral modification. And I think this applies both to sustainability and to the idea of aging in place. We want to allow for people to age in their homes in a way where the change from between various stages of life are comfortable and not as abrupt as they are today when we force them to move to different kinds of living facilities. So the idea here is to develop technologies that are user-friendly for multiple generations, which will potentially allow multiple generations to live in the same house, but at least allow multiple generations to support one another in a single house. They, of course, have to be affordable. And we want to allow for these technologies to seamlessly transition as the technologies improve and as the users age. So UBC has an initiative called the Campus as a Living Lab initiative, which is a great initiative, but the campus is, as you might suspect, a little bit of an unusual place because we have a very large population of undergrads who are wonderfully healthy, and we have a population of professors and staff people who spend all their time thinking and teaching. And so we want to, in the PPFH initiative, try to complement that and think about how these technologies can be rolled out into the kind of places that everybody else works and lives in. This is supported by ISIS, the Institute for Computing, Information, and Cognitive Systems at UBC, which is an interdisciplinary institute spread across most of the faculties. It is supported, or it is also a TELUS initiative. TELUS is a leading telecommunications company, but we have many other supporters. And I want to point out that one of the emphases in the PPFH project is to bring in commercial partners. And this is not because we want to make money. I am a professor. I didn't get into this job because I want to make money. It's because we need commercialization partners to bring these technologies out to everybody else. The university is not going to do it by itself. We either need existing companies or startups who are going to produce products that can be then purchased by either people or by institutions that serve people. And without those partners, it's just not going to happen. It's going to stay inside the university. So the team is 24 professors and a whole bunch of graduate students. I'm not sure if these numbers are up to date. I just joined the project myself about 6 months ago. The project has been going on for 3 years. And we are developing something called the Living Lab. Those of you who've been out to UBC, I don't know why this suddenly rotated sideways. So this is, if you've been out to UBC, this is where the old bus loop was. The bookstore is somewhere over here. This is the sort of campus entrance, including the new dentistry building. And the Living Lab is going to go back here along this very nice new greenway that replaced the old bus loop. In the meantime, we are developing a much smaller project inside the existing ISIS building, a reconfigurable demonstration lab where we can do some of this work. So these are some of the themes that PPFH has been undertaking, and I'm really not going to give you a lot of detail in these themes, just a few of the projects that are underway in these themes, and these are not the only themes that have been underway. The first area is communications and sensing, and these are not things that you are going to worry about directly. These are things to support the technologies that we're hearing about today, and in particular, we have to be able to manage interference and communicate vast quantities of data, preferably wirelessly. You think about having these cameras that are going to be able to track where you're moving so that you don't have to carry anything on you or keep track of whether you've fallen down, and that's great, but these cameras need wires. They need power and they need communication. And right now, the labs that I've seen in the smart home type labs, these things are all wired in, which means you have to run, hundreds of meters of cable through a typical house. This is not something that you can retrofit onto a house very comfortably. And so this technology, the research in this area is really looking at questions of how can we support more data transmission within a house. So multimedia content delivery. The nice thing about, if we've got lots of data transmission capability, we can also allow you to all watch high definition movies all at once without overloading the waves. So that's all I'm going to tell you about that one. Energy management. So one thing that we're looking at is non-intrusive load monitoring, and the idea here is that we can keep track of what devices are using what amount of power in your home without having to instrument every single one of them. Again, the goal here is to allow this kind of technology to be retrofitted inexpensively on existing infrastructure rather than having to put in new sensors. And the reason that we want to do this is so that, the main reason is so that you know what is going on in your own house. What appliances are using a lot of power? What appliances may be failing and starting to use more power due to they're at the end of their life cycle? And how can, when you have this information at your fingertips, research has shown that people actually do a better job of power management. This will also hopefully help larger entities, such as the utilities, manage their power support better. And this one I'm really excited by because it's just cool. You don't have to plug in stuff anymore to get power. So these days we use radiative coupling, which is basically transmitters and receivers. And some of you may have used inductive coupling. For example, some Apple laptops, you don't actually plug something in, you just stick it against it. And some of the new cars, electric cars, are using inductive coupling to transmit power without actually having to make a physical connection to the power source. And the reason this is very cool, and this is an old idea, that's Nikola Tesla, who pretty much spent the end of his life trying to get this stuff to work. But the reason this is so cool is that you won't have to plug in anything. And like I said, if you want to distribute all those fancy sensors around your house, you need two things. You need communication. Well, we've got wireless communication now, we just need to make it faster. And you need power. Power is a little bit easier to wire because it turns out our walls are already full of wires carrying power, but it's still not cheap. And we'd like to be able to just take these things and stick them down on the desk, just like I stick my laptop down now, and they will get both power and communication without me having to plug anything in. My mom also heavily supports this because she wants to stop having to stoop down and plug in her laptop and her lamp and all the other things that you have to plug in around the house. The health and wellness theme is probably the most directly relevant to the topics of this conference today, and it's the area that I've been working in. One of the things that we've been working on is activity recognition. Again, this is why we want the cameras. Among the things that you can do with this is really try to address some of the privacy questions, because if you can extract these high-level pieces of information that George was sitting at the table and holding a cup, then you no longer have to transmit images, which people are much more concerned about video leaving their house than they are about maybe high-level pieces of information leaving their house. Diet support system. Fridge will keep track of what kind of sandwich you made. Did you put lettuce in it or did you put corned beef? Non-contact heart rate. This isn't exactly what we want. It's good. It's certainly much more comfortable than those heart rate bands that you have to wear these days, or potentially even more comfortable than the newer ones that just go on your wrist. This one just looks at your face, and even if you're doing this, it'll still figure out what your heart rate is. I hope this can move to the point of detecting blood pressure as well, because that's really a holy grail of non-contact sensing and can tell us a lot about what health levels. I should point out the pretty pictures here were part of the validation phase. You won't be actually having to sit there and put your finger in a pulse oximeter to make this system work. My own research is on smart wheelchairs. I'm much more comfortable with the group of speakers who came in the previous session. In fact, I work with Jamie and Emma on some of the projects that they mentioned. One of the things that we've been working on is this smart wheelchair idea. And this is an example of one of the trials that we did in some long-term care facilities with cognitively impaired older adults, with the goal of understanding two things. What sensors do we need to make these chairs work, and what kind of user interfaces can cognitively impaired older adults work with to provide shared control systems. And of course, one of the challenges here is that the more cognitively impaired you get, the less you want the chair to do things for you. I should point out that we can have a chair drive you around a facility like this, maybe not your own home, they tend to be rather cluttered, but long-term care centers, we could have a chair drive you around right now. It costs you about $30,000, and you couldn't tell it what to do. You could say, I would like to go to the dining room now, and it would drive you there. And I don't think this is what people want. Certainly our studies support that. People do not want to be shuttled from place to place. They want to have some control over this, and some days they're feeling good and they want to do it themselves, and some days they're feeling tired and they don't want to do it. And so that's really what we're after. We want to design a system that, I'll go to the next slide, that will support people to adapt the level of support that's provided by the smart wheelchair. I'd also like to say, you're looking at this chair and thinking to yourself, I don't even want to wear a hearing aid. I feel embarrassed wearing a hearing aid. I don't want something like this that's got sensors all over it. Well, no, our goal is something like this. Can you spot the sensor? It's not this thing. This is part of the power wheelchair. The sensor is a little Kinect mounted right down here under the battery pack. That's what we'd like to get to, a smart wheelchair where you can hardly see the sensors that we've added to it. There's another theme here, which I know very little about, I'm afraid to say, about building the environment and home environments and things like that. There's been some studies that show, for example, that if we build environments with tall ceilings, they encourage creativity. There's some interesting questions about what kind of effects the home environment has on people's ability to maintain their cognitive and physical behaviors in the spite of advancing age. And so this is one of the things that is being looked at. Questions of presence. So this isn't so much spying on you as the fact that when people are watching you, you do a better job at things. You don't just, and I want to point out, you don't just behave better, although, you know, there's been some evidence of that lately in the news regarding newscasters and people doing really obnoxious things in the background. But also, it turns out that you do better at your tasks if you think somebody is watching you, which is an interesting conclusion. So this question of presence and almost being performing for somebody is a research challenge, because of course researchers, we face it when we do studies, and it might be something that could be used to help people, support people in their homes. You know, just get somebody to watch somebody watching them while they're preparing their tea. And this is a multimedia system looking at high dynamic range. And again, this is one of those just cool things that I hope we get into people's homes soon. These are TV screens that actually display the kind of light intensity levels that you see in real life compared to the light intensity levels that modern TV sets can produce. It's just amazing when you actually see it. It's like looking through a window. So that's the People in Planet Friendly Home Initiative. There is a website you can go to, listed up there at the top. It's an ongoing project at UBC, and thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Emily O'Hearn, and I will be talking about something completely different. I am a master's student in actually Steve Rabinovich's lab, and today I'll be speaking on will stick-on hip protectors improve patient compliance in wearing protectors in the hospital environment. So falls are the leading cause of injury among individuals over the age of 65, and in-hospital falls account for 38% of patient incidences. And nearly 1 in every 1,000 elderly patients suffer a hip fracture during their admission to a Canadian acute care hospital. So this accounts for over 2,000 in-hospital hip fractures every single year. So in-hospital hip fractures have many negative repercussions, including decreased independence as well as quality of life for the faller, but it also decreases staff morale and decreases the family caregiver trust. It also increases mortality, with 50% of individuals passing away after 1 year of the fracture. Now, this number does decrease if the fracture occurs within the community. It decreases to 25% of individuals pass away after a hip fracture. In-hospital hip fractures also result in longer lengths of stay, as well as increased healthcare costs. So, by a show of hands, who here is familiar with what a hip protector is? So for those of you who are not familiar with what a hip protector is, there's two images up here as an example, and they can either come in underwear, shorts, or pants, and they have a pocket over the hip bone or the greater trochanter area that a softer hard shell pad slips into. And they are promoted within Fraser Health Authority for high-risk populations, and they have been shown to reduce the risk for hip fracture by up to 80% if they are worn at the time of the fall, and only for specific types of hip protectors. However, when evaluated on an intent to treat basis, hip protectors reduce fracture by only 18% in long-term care environment. And when I say intent to treat, what I mean by that is that I'm simply comparing the intervention group with the control group, and you're not considering whether or not in the intervention group, if a hip fracture occurred, whether or not they were actually wearing the hip protector at the time of the fall. So this is the primary reason for the discrepancy between these numbers, and that primary reason is the poor user compliance. And in clinical trials, it's shown that user compliance is less than 50%. So another fact that reduces or that conflicts these results is the lack of regulation on quality of design of hip protectors. And this table here really demonstrates that. These are 25 commercially available hip protectors that you can buy right now. And it goes all the way from 40% protection all the way down to 2% protection. So on an interesting note, Fraser Health Authority within their hospitals uses two pads that have about a 20 to 25% level of protection. So when we're looking on this graph right here, that would be anything above hip guard. So these all have been tested on the Simon Fraser University Hip Impact Pendulum, which you can see on the, I guess, your right-hand side. So the pendulum is made up of a pendulum arm as well as a surrogate pelvis. And the surrogate pelvis is designed to simulate a sideways fall on the hip for an elderly individual. And this is the machine that I used for my testing as well. So such conventional hip protector garments have been recorded to have many challenges, user compliance being one of them. And this is due to the appearance, but also the level of comfort. Many patients state that they're too hot when they're being worn. It's also a low staff commitment has been reported in a lot of journals. And this might be because that the hip protectors increase the staff workload within the hospital. And there's also a problem with availability, and this is due to the fact that hip protectors become lost and damaged regularly. So we're constantly having to buy them and replace them. However, there's also many benefits to supporting the use of conventional hip protectors, including the fact that they have been shown to work. However, the problem is user compliance. The pads are inserted into the pockets and not attached to the skin, and there's minimal side effects that have been reported. Hip protectors have been shown to increase patient confidence as well as independence, and some models have been shown to be comfortable. For example, the pants have been reported as more comfortable than others. And also conventional hip protectors are more familiar than stick-on hip protectors, and they're also more similar to traditional underwear, so someone might be more comfortable using those. However, there is a potential for a disposable stick-on hip protector to address some of these previously mentioned barriers. And here's an image of a stick-on hip protector. And some of these potential benefits could be an increase in force attenuation, which we can test using the hip impact pendulum. The pad is secured to the skin, so we don't need to worry about it moving around or shifting. It offers continuous protection, including going to the washroom, which is an area where most hip protectors are you need to remove them. And this is an area of high risk for falls. It also has the potential to decrease staff workload. There are no laundry requirements because it's disposable. They're not patient-specific, and they are at a much lower cost unit. So my study objectives, there's 2 of them. The first one is to develop this low-cost disposable stick-on hip protector, and then the second one is to compare patient compliance with the conventional hip protector versus the stick-on hip protector through a prospective study in 2 intensive care units at Surrey Memorial Hospital. So for the biomechanical testing, we use the hip impact simulator. And this table here, you can see HP1 and HP2. Those are the 2 garment hip protectors that are currently the standard of care within Fraser Health hospitals. And then A through D, those are prototypes that I have created and throughout the optimization period. So starting with A, I looked at 9 different surface designs and found that the donut hole provided the best protection, and I believe that this is because it allows for both the pad to absorb the force as well as displace the force to the surrounding soft tissue. Going from A to prototype B, I increased the thickness from 17 millimeters in pad A to 21 millimeters in pad B. And thickness we need to be careful with, because if we increase the thickness too much, we could then be negatively affecting user compliance in people wanting to wear them. Pad C, after we did the feasibility testing, which I will talk about next, we found that by tapering the edges, we could improve the adhesion of the pad to the skin, and the clothing didn't catch as much when you're pulling up your pants or pulling them down. And then pad D, we were able to find a foam material that was lighter and that the adhesive stuck to better. And you can see that there's a slight decrease in that number. However, we're still well above the current standard of care that's being used. So for the feasibility trial, it was done with a preliminary pad that was equivalent to what is currently being used in the hospital. And we asked 6 patients to wear the stick-on hip protectors for 7 consecutive days. And we used a hypoallergenic medical adhesive tape to adhere the pad to the skin. And this tape was originally designed for medical device attachment onto compromised or sensitive skin. This tape offers a strong and reliable adhesion with minimal epidermal stripping. And the manufacturer specifications state that you can actually leave this tape on the skin for up to 21 days. And you're able to remove the pad and re-adhere the pad to the skin without compromising that adhesion. So we asked the nursing staff to remove the pads daily and inspect the skin as well as the adhesive. And we also asked the nurses to report on use issues based on direct observation and patient feedback. So out of the 6 patients that we asked to use the pads, 5 agreed to wear them. However, if you notice with patient F, they had previously refused the garment pads when they were offered to them, and they were also admitted to the hospital for reasons of confusion. The other 5 were admitted to the hospital for either a fracture or an injury. The 5 who agreed to wear them, 3 thought that they had no complaints about discomfort. 2 did have complaints about discomfort. However, that is a very common complaint with hip protectors. And the one who complained about discomfort agreed to wear them during the day but not at night. And the other one agreed to wear them anyways because she understood the risk of fracture. There was no adverse effects reported from the pad or the adhesive tape, and there was no complaints of pain when removing the pad. And like I mentioned before, we were able to use this feasibility trial to optimize the pad design and taper the edges to avoid catching on clothing, which you can see in this image here with the tapering. So the next stage is to conduct a clinical trial. And I will be looking at whether or not there's a difference in user compliance between the conventional garment hip protector and the stick-on hip protector. So you can see the images here. These are the garment hip protector and the stick-on hip protector that we will be providing to the 2 intensive care units at Surrey Memorial Hospital throughout the duration of the study. The objectives of the clinical trial are to first compare patient acceptance and adherence rates between the 2 hip protector models, and the data will be documented by the nursing staff in the patient medical records. Patient acceptance will be measured as whether or not the patient agreed to wear the hip protector at least once during their stay in the hospital. And adherence rates will be measured as how many nurses' shifts the hip protector was worn divided by the number of nurses' shifts that the hip protector was prescribed to be worn. So in these 2 hospital units, the nurses' shifts are 8 hours, and there's 3 of them per day. The second objective is to conduct staff focus groups to probe barriers and facilitators for each model of hip protector. And then the third objective will be to determine the costs associated with purchase of both of these models. And I'll be doing that by monitoring the number of garment models used as well as the number of garment models lost and comparing that with the number of stick-on models used. So just to give you a sense of the timeline for this clinical trial, the first 2 months I will be providing education to the staff as well as having a 2-week run-in period with the garment models. The education will be focused specifically on the garment models, and we'll be measuring patient acceptance and adherence. Then for the following 2 months, months 3 through 4, we will be giving, again, another education session, this time focused on the stick-on hip protector, and providing a 2-week run-in period to transition from the garment hip protector to the stick-on hip protector, and then measuring acceptance and adherence again. And then for the 5th month, conducting the staff focus groups and looking at barriers and facilitators. So I just want to take this moment to thank everyone who's been involved with this project, and as well as our funding sources. And thank you very much.
I wasn't going to ask this, but since nobody else asked a question, I'm just curious as to whether there has been any both analysis or concerns around radio wave impacts on people. And we're talking about a lot of devices being installed in homes and you know, conductive devices to charging and powering, and you know, we hear people concerned about, you know, living below power lines, or people concerned about cell phones to their ears, or Wi-Fi's being banned from schools and so on. And I'm just curious as to what kind of feedback you've had on that, and what kind of how you've taken that into account in your work. To either.
I'm not sure which one of us that would necessarily be applied to, but I can tell you that the equipment that we have been using within the VA has the output of less than a cell phone in terms of power level. So, and it's approved for use with people with pacemakers. So it's a very, very low amplitude signal. But my colleagues in computer science.
So the communication stuff that's been done is of similar power levels. It's really not something that we suspect would be threatening. The inductive power supply system, it's a little less clear, and I think that is something there's ongoing studies to figure out sort of what levels are going to be safe for sure, and whether you can achieve reasonable power supplies at safe levels of inductive power. So that remains to be seen. One of the features here is that it's definitely, you get a very fast drop-off as you get farther and farther from the transmitter. And so, for example, as I mentioned, this is already being used in cars and on Apple laptops, this inductive power coupling system. But you'll never even notice it because, of course, they're coupling over a matter of a few centimeters. And so the amount of power that escapes there is trivial. Whether this is going to turn out to be feasible is an interesting question. As I said, Tesla spent decades trying to make it work and never managed to get it to that stage.
Just follow-up comment on some of these newer sensor for measuring the depth. They use time-of-flight sensors. So if you have multiple of the sensor, there are interferences, but with proper calibration, you can kind of overcome that.
Thank you. I'm Jeannie Cathcart. I'm retired last year after 35 years in post-secondary education, mostly in the oral health sciences. I was wondering, I'm very interested in this data mining and the ethical issues around informed consent, particularly in people with cognitive deficits. And also the idea that you might have communities of people such as the military or the armed forces. Is anybody using this data to support managed care or social assistance or any kind of outcomes related to insurance? I guess it's two questions, really. I wondered how you deal with all the data that you're mining and using in various ways, partly for research, partly for outcomes, and managing what kind of interventions you do.
Right, well, that's an excellent question. I can speak from the work that we're doing at the VA. The overarching project is funded through what's called a T21, or a Treatment Improvement Grant. It's considered to be effectively a quality improvement project for the VA in terms of providing superior care for the veterans. As such, virtually everyone who goes through there, it's basically a condition of the treatment, as it was. Now, as far as research publications and the like, we are permitted under a very, very limited and very heavily controlled set of strictures of publishing group data, but no individually identifiable information for any one individual. So, for example, one of the two publications which came out in JHTR was through the T21 grant and met the requirement for oversight by the VA and their internal ethics board. So that information that we're producing is being used by the clinicians as part of the process improvement, so they can keep track of medication compliance, et cetera. Medication compliance, especially for people with cognitive impairments, is a real problem. They forget to take pills. If they do, and especially if it's a complex regimen where there is part of their recovery from a TBI, where the medications change frequently, they can wind up back in the emergency room. You may wind up spending an extra, $20,000 on their care, and then a lengthy rehabilitation interval because they had forgotten to take the medications. So it's very important to keep them on that straight and narrow. The second project, the one in which we use the individuals, the 10 individuals, to look at the fractality that we got from the GPS as a way of predicting long-term outcome. The enrollment process on that was very, very carefully overseen by both the veterans and the USF IRB. It was, I can't tell you the amount of additional efforts we went to in order to make sure that not only the individual but also the caregivers and had proxy consents where those were necessary, and at an extremely restricted set. So we weren't able to go in and just mine things. The only data that we could collect was either data that we specifically collected ourselves from the individual, from the data and the tracking system, or were approved by the VA about a year in advance. That, as a matter of fact, I can tell you the entire IRB review process on that took 1 year before we were ever able to collect our first bit of data. So they're very, very careful about that. That's a huge concern. As far as the tracking data itself, most of what you're going to see, even if you were able to grab one of those files, there are a series of X, Y, and Z data points. It's like, 10.5, 9.2, and 1.1, and then an ID number for the tag. Nobody can do anything with it. Right, of course. Sure.
We'll need a very quick end.
Okay, so last question, Janice Cunningham, Mobile Health Specialist. I was fascinated at the mHealth Summit when I saw some nanotechnology from NC State where they're using the stretchable filament, nanofilaments in wearables, clothing, ultra thin, like almost, what is it, like saran wrap thickness for everything from monitoring vitals to motion. Have any of you looked at that and see how that fits in? Because when you look at power, form factor, size, being self-powered, do you see that happening anytime soon or fitting into what you're?
Well, from my point of view, we concern mostly with motion and activities of healthy, more or less, person. Embedding the clothing. Embedding the cloth with some micro machine sensors and wireless, that has potential that complements maybe the kind of work that I'm looking at. Yeah. I don't know what.
Ian, are you doing any work with wearable?
I'm not aware of anything going on at UBC, but sounds cool.
It was.
I think there's a lot of rapid advances in the hardware. So again, please join me in thanking the speakers.